Okay guys, welcome back to another episode of Rotten Reviews. On this episode I'm going to take a look at the 2011 movie Super 8. It has a 81% tomato meter fresh rating and a 75% audience score. Now this is going to be a completely contrary rotten review on my part, simply because I believe this movie, for a lot of reasons, deserves to be rotten. And I'm going to try and make my case here. Perhaps I'll succeed, perhaps I'll fail, maybe I'll change somebody's mind. But I think that this film has aged really poorly in the last 8 years, and I think it's going to continue to age poorly. Some of this, I'll agree, I'll be charitable and say that some of this bad aging effect is because of more recent and relevant fictional material that we've seen since this was produced in 2011. And somewhat, I'll say that this was contrived from the beginning, and it doesn't deserve to be given a fresh rating just because Spielberg is invoked or he's a producer listed on the box cover. I don't know the extent of his involvement over J.J. Abrams, but to me that's no excuse for this being overly cliched and boring. And in fact, after several years of forgetting about this movie, I find that it is quite forgettable. I needed a refresher just to figure out what was going on. When I first watched this movie, when it was new on home video release on DVD, I never did figure out exactly what the logic to the alien or the monster was. At some parts of the movie, it's trying to convince the audience that the monster is a monster. And then at the end, it suggests that this monster isn't quite a monster. He's just an alien who wants to go home, sort of like an E.T. type theme. But however, the monster is either killing and or abducting people. The movie doesn't make it clear on which one that is. You can't tell if it's a bad guy or a good guy. In fact, the alien or the monster doesn't seem to know what he's doing other than just carefully positioning himself in ways that the camera won't allow you to get a good look at him. That's another big failing of this movie. I believe that, through the use of the way the camera is positioned and moved around, the cinematography, it is quite clear that the audience should get a look at this creature right from the beginning, and yet it's deliberate that the audience doesn't, and that comes across as completely contrived and a cheap way of creating suspense. I don't think it succeeds in creating suspense for an adult at all. I believe that if you were 8 years old and you saw this, you might find upon your first viewing or two that this is suspenseful. I wasn't into it from, the get-go. As being over the age of 30 when this came out, it didn't have me in a state of suspense whatsoever. In fact, I was wondering why they were so cheaply trying to make references to establish that this takes place in 1979. But they did so cheaply and really on the nose. They weren't subtle about it at all, and it just came across to me as trying to make a nostalgia homage to Spielberg's previous works, E.T. and Close Encounters. It just failed for me, and I find it offensive when I read reviews that people say this was so spectacular, that it had them gripped. They were so scared. They were kept in suspense. They didn't know what was going to happen, and it was such a big plot twist and reveal to them at the end, and it was such a tearjerker when the alien finally got to go home. I'm just tired of hearing it, and so I decided to do this rotten review, and I'm going to be completely contrarian, and I hope it does rub people the wrong way so they can wake up and demand better quality movies from people like Steven Spielberg and, yes, from J.J. Abrams. They need to stop being so cheap. They need to stop treating the audiences so stupidly, and I think that this audience score deserves to be around 55%. I think it deserves to be rotten because the effort just isn't there to produce a product that is even halfway relevant compared to the sources it's trying to mimic. I think Close Encounters is, for its day and even now, it is a relevant science fiction film. This tries to pay cheap cheap homage to it, and it just comes across as insulting in the effort to me. Yes, Spielberg is listed as a producer. I don't know how hands-on he was in this, but it's a very cheap way to try to invoke the nostalgia of the past. It doesn't even try to do it effectively. Let's go right into the audience reviews. Right off the top of the bat, we've got them in September of 2019. 4 stars. Wasn't expecting that. Exquisite sci-fi movie, a must-watch for the sci-fi fans. I'll disagree. If I had to give this a star rating, I would say it deserves 2.5 stars peak. I'm not even going to give it 3 stars because I think it was just cheaply done, especially in the script. We didn't get a convincing reason for what the alien or this alien monster was trying to do. I mean, yes, it's revealed he was trying to go home, but along the way, it made everything else irrelevant. It wants to keep us in the dark, but yet it never satisfactorily, it doesn't give us a satisfactory logic of just what was the alien trying to do. Yes, he was trying to steal parts to go home, but why was he abducting people or killing people? And I'm not even clear if he actually killed people or he just decided to abduct them for some unknown reason. What was the reasoning there? Why did he need to take the people to his underground lair? He didn't kill them all. They were sort of hostages, like kept in sort of a suspended animation. What was the purpose of that? It doesn't seem to have any logic to it. I don't get it. 3 stars. I was excited before the alien appeared, but when it appeared, I was disappointed. If they want to depict a pity alien who just wants to go back to his planet, they shouldn't have let him eat humans. The climax scene is not impressive at all. I like the zombie film that children took very much. Children acted very well. Well, again, they're bringing up something that I did. If you want to sympathize with the alien to get back home, and people say they did, why was the alien abducting and I guess killing people? See, I'm not even clear if the alien really ate people or he just murdered them for some reason. The film doesn't quite make up its mind on that, it seems. And the climax is like you see it coming from a million miles away, but yet you don't know why the alien took so long to get to that point. It's like the plot just needed to move along for the purpose of keeping the audience in their seat and no other reason. It's very lazy. It's insulting to me. That's why I'm doing this. This reviewer says that the children acted very well. I don't think they acted badly, but I think they weren't memorable. Now, when I said that, subsequent fictional material makes this look worse, and I say that stuff like, for example, Stranger Things on Netflix, it kind of tries to do the same thing, but it does it a lot better. You know these characters, you relate to the characters, they differentiate each other a lot better. You don't mistake one character for another in something like Stranger Things. In this movie, the characters, even though they're the same age that I was in 1979, they don't come across as differentiated to me. I don't feel like I relate to them. They seem very cardboard. Again, their acting isn't good or bad. It's just like very shallow. And, after 5 minutes after watching this film, I couldn't tell you any of their names. And yet, I was this age in 1979, so this should have appealed to me, but it didn't. I think it appeals more to people that were 8 or 9 years old when this movie was released. But for somebody that was 8 or 9 in 1979, this movie didn't appeal to me at all. It just came across as very shallow as far as these these children that were characters. So I'll move on. 4 stars. A refreshing, nostalgic look back at summer science fiction. Director J.J. Abrams' sci-fi coming-of-age picture Super 8, 2011, is a delightful throwback before Stranger Things ever endeared itself to audiences everywhere. Well, see, I disagree. This is not a coming-of-age film. When this film starts, these kids are 8 or 9 years old. Some are a little bit older. Some are teenagers, clearly. But they're not any older or wiser at the end of it. They don't come of age. Nothing happens to them traditionally that you would say, well, they've changed in a way that they've come of age. No, they haven't. They're still just as shallow as they were before, so I completely disagree. Let's continue. Drawing inspiration from Richard Donner's The Goonies, Steven Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial, as well as Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Abrams finds himself directing his greatest film with Super 8. Set during the end of the hippie era, going into the 1980s synth world. You see, I completely disagree. This isn't a four-star movie. I say that, if you're trying to say that it's all about the world building, that we're in 1979, don't you appreciate that? No, I don't. The way they characterize that we're going from the late 70s into the 80s right around the corner is to just show somebody wearing a Walkman and making that a big point of one scene in the movie. Stuff like that's not really, you've got to do better than that. That's a very cheap, superficial, cardboard way to say that you're in 1979. And you get a little hint of the music playing on the Walkman's headphones. You've got to do a lot better than that. I mean, come on. To me, this just comes off as cheap. I was there in 1979, so yes, I'll say all of this is authentic. Even the clothing styles are authentic, sure, but again, it's just so superficial. Like, what about this being in 1979 is so important, other than that the Army soldiers are dressed in the same uniforms they were in Close Encounters or in E.T. Other than that, this is just very shallow, trying to play off of Close Encounters nostalgia, for example. It doesn't really help anything in the story. You could have taken the story and put it in 1985. It wouldn't have changed anything about the plot. You would have just changed up the uniforms on the Army soldiers. Otherwise, what's the point? It seems very cheap, and it's just a throwback, trying to recapture the look of Close Encounters, which took place in '77. It comes across very cheap to me. I was there at the time. I was this age. I was the kid. It's just very disturbing to me that the audience considers this worthy of a 75%. So I'm going to continue, and maybe I'll get madder as I continue. 4 stars. This movie is very charming. I disagree. The movie's very superficial. That's not charming. 3.5 stars. It's got its flaws and its hang-ups, but I enjoyed the finale and the bravery of the children. Plus, the plot is quite mysterious and cool. The only thing that's mysterious about the plot is that although the camera zooms around and flies around properly where it should be able to show you the creature, it never does. It's always just moved into the perfect setup angle so that you can never see the creature. That doesn't come across as mysterious to me. That comes across as contrived and cheap, and a cheap way to get some kind of cheap suspense. It's very off-putting. 2 stars. So odd that this is the most original movie J.J. Abrams has written and directed, yet feels the most derivative. I agree 100%. Yeah, this is J.J. Abrams, like, trying to suck up to Spielberg to show that he can make it look like it was done by Spielberg. But yet Spielberg did this in a convincing way, and it set characters up. They weren't cardboard. It's not just the fact that it takes place in a similar time period. It's as though J.J. Abrams thinks that just changing the window dressing on something to make it in a different time period suddenly makes it relevant, like that movie that was shot back then by a director far superior to him. It's very offensive. This movie, Super 8, is more concerned with recreating memorable works from past Spielberg movies rather than fully committing to its own story outright. It wouldn't be until the Duffer Brother released Stranger Things a few years later on Netflix that his movie is laughably derivative by comparison. Unlike Stranger Things, you're convinced Steven Spielberg directed. Yeah, this person is saying the same thing I am. This is the most superficial, derivative, and insulting way to take advantage of the nostalgia of the time period that Close Encounters was set in, to somehow play homage to Spielberg. But this is almost an insult to Spielberg from my point of view. If I were Spielberg, I would consider this just somebody sucking up to me that really doesn't understand what I'm about, and just feels like that if he copies these derivative, superficial things, that he'll become me. I would be insulted by this. 0.5 star. This was as dull as it gets. Not even an appearance from long-term collaborator Simon Pegg could have saved this directorial effort for J.J. Abrams. I agree. I'll give it 2.5 stars, though, for the effort that they put into making it look like it took place in 1979. There were a few small mistakes, particularly for people that knew about the actual setting in the Midwestern town. I believe this was Ohio. You'll find their nitpicks it really stands out to them. But for somebody that didn't grow up in a small town in Ohio, then you wouldn't catch those little mistakes. There were some other very minor mistakes. You know, they had a few things off by like 9 or 10 months or up to a year. That's forgivable, so I give them 2.5 stars. They put effort into it. But, you know, here's somebody saying it's a half a star. Well, yeah, I kind of agree with them too. This comes off as more of an insulting homage to Spielberg than, you know, a true respectful homage to him. 2.5 stars. Some good performances from the kids and a decent job at establishing a setting and movie feel for the decade that it takes place in. Abrams also gets many masterful shots that elevate the tension. No, see, that's the opposite of what I think. Yeah, he gets masterful shots that almost reveal the deliberate care he's taken into hiding the monster, and that just comes across to me as an adult as too obvious and stupid. And maybe if you're 8, like I said, this will go over your head. But in earlier far superior works that were shot and took place in this time period, if a director didn't want you to show you the monster, they found much more non-immersion breaking ways to do it, suggesting that it's not possible for the camera or the point of view to be in a position to see the monster. But in this one, Abrams shows you that he's got the camera in the right places to see this thing in its full glory, and yet it just pops into a place for no reason, so that you can't see it, and that's very cheap. Sadly, overall, the movie is far too standard and becomes a bland summer movie that you've experienced a few dozen times. Yeah, being over the age of 30 when this came out, this just seemed completely cliched and derivative. There was nothing original about it, and it was a bore fest because of that. 5 stars. One of the best movies to come out of its genre since The Goonies, but in actual fact more thrilling and scary than that even. Spielberg at his finest production again, and it sure takes you back to his classic 80s hits like E.T., funny, witty, scary, and fun. A hit with my 9-year-old. This is where Stranger Things clearly got its inspiration from. Well, perhaps Stranger Things got its inspiration from this, sure, but Stranger Things actually did it good. It did it in a respectful way. It didn't bore you to death. A hit with your 9-year-old, I agree with that. If you were 8 or 9, this would come across to you just fine, especially on your first viewing. But what I suggest is somebody that saw this at 8 or 9, when they're 28 or 29, they're going to bag this thing as hard as I am, maybe harder. 1.5 stars, boring, and the children actors are annoying. Yeah, boring, and the children are just like cardboard cutouts of children from that time period. They're just boring. They didn't annoy me. They just bored me. Some of their language, some of their vernacular was right on the money, and some of it wasn't, because I should know, I was one of those kids back then. So, you know, you wouldn't know that if you weren't exactly my age, but it's not exactly right. And to me, they were cardboard. 5 stars, well-made sci-fi, basically a family film or kids film. Might be scary for some. Yeah, like 8-year-olds. Brilliant actors, excellent story, plus side story, and make sure to watch through the end credits. Don't get the poor ratings from adult men. Don't think they get it's a kid's film. Some great one-liners and black comedy, excellent special effects, worth a watch. Yeah, I'm an adult man, and no, I don't get that it's a children's film. It's not a children's film. It's produced and marketed to adults. So I disagree, and I say 2 stars. 2.5, peaking. 2 stars. Super 8 is a tribute cinematic nostalgia mashup that does a fine job at building tension and creating intrigue. Unfortunately, the poorly conceived resolutions and payoffs make the second half disappointing. Yeah, it really spirals into oblivion in the second half, because that's when you start to realize that the bad guy military conspiracy plot element is kind of comic book logic, and it doesn't work. You know, the bad guys do things that don't make sense unless you are 8 years old, and the alien itself, or the monster, doesn't really make sense. You know it's an alien and a monster, and you're figuring out by the second half that it's trying to build something probably to go home, right? That's not exactly a big, huge mystery, but yet the movies treats it like you're too stupid to know that, and it doesn't even seem to know whether this is an alien that wants to go home and we should sympathize with it, or it's a monster that kidnaps and eats people for whatever purpose. It doesn't make any sense. But the second half, you realize that it's spiraling out of control. That's what I realized the first time I saw this. By the time we were past the gas station scene, I realized this thing was going nowhere. Um, yeah, and so here we are. 5 stars. J.J. Abrams has done it again. Well, I'll agree with that. Not the 5 stars, but J.J. Abrams has ruined a lot of stuff. This is just, one of his earlier works on the big screen that I right away I did not appreciate it. Other things he's done again, so to speak. He did quite a job with Lost, and it derailed into complete nonsense before it got near the end too. So yeah, I'll say he's done it again. 1 star. This is a lifeless film that tries and fails to capture Spielberg's best. Exactly. It tries and fails, unless you're like 7.5, but then again, you weren't around when Spielberg was at his best, certainly not in 77 to see Close Encounters. So if you're a little kid in 2011, maybe this just warms your heart, but it is complete fail to everyone else. 4 stars. Typically, I am on the fence about J.J. Abrams' films. He's a hit or miss director, producer, writer. Lost, Star Trek, Star Wars are all still debated, while films like Regarding Henry and Mission Impossible 3 are examples of his best form. There are so many films of his that have so much potential and end up wasted because of his mystery box theories. Lost and Force Awakens are 2 such examples. He has such a Steven Spielberg vibe about him, but usually it is squandered by mainstream goals. Well, they're giving this thing a 4-star review, but yet they're pretty much telling you what I think about J.J. Abrams. So we'll just leave it there and say I agree with that review. 2.5 stars. I kind of liked the making a movie within the movie aspect of Super 8 a lot more than the chief plot with the monster and the train and the bad man government and the blah blah blah, which isn't ideal, but saying that obviously means I liked something about it. Yeah, I'll agree with that. I kind of liked the superficial setting this up to kind of resemble Close Encounters. It was passable, but again, it turned out to be completely for nothing and completely shallow by the second half, okay? 3 stars. I would rather have watched a movie that simply revolved around the kids making their film project. Everything else is insufferable. The plot, the villain, and the point. Yeah, I'll agree. To me, it really kind of started to go down when, the kids are making their film scene on the train platform, and then the scientist guy, who happens to also be a teacher at the school, shows up with his pickup truck and gets hit by the train. It all started to go down from there. That's when also plot holes started to show up. So I kind of agree. 1 star. Not impressed. In theaters when it ended, a man nearby said, "Huh?" really loudly, like he didn't quite get the point of the movie. I felt the same. Yeah, you're left at the end with, well, surprise, this is just a sympathetic alien that wants to go home, and you're supposed to feel like a tear or two coming out of your eyes, like remember E.T., guys? Do you remember that? Except it doesn't work, because before that in the movie, not just very few minutes before that, it showed you the alien like killing people or eating them in a way that didn't make sense to begin with. So you're just confused saying, what did I just watch? And that's how I felt too. 4 stars. A good film with a lot of memorable and funny characters and great performances from the entire cast, although a bit ridiculous at times, and there is also a very lazy point with the writing at a certain scene. It's still a great film and is definitely worth a watch. Lots of replay value, a great J.J. Abrams film. Well, if you're just a fanboy of J.J.'s work, then great. Slap this poster on your wall along with his other ones, but I disagree. 3.5 stars, good movie, enjoyable. Sure, if you're a little kid, okay. Now let's see, we're in 2019. This came out in 2011, so let's say you were 8 years old. Okay, we're 8 years down the road, you're 16, so maybe as a late stage teenager, you still haven't graduated high school yet, you still think this was cool. Okay, I agree, this is plausible, but revisit this again when you're 28 years old and tell me this is worth something, then I think we'll find ourselves in agreement on this. This is rotten. 3.5 stars, not best, it was okay. Well, that's not an okay amount of stars. 4.5 stars. Watched this movie when I was 11 in the cinemas with my dad, and I got out of that cinema inspired as heck. It was the first time ever a movie made me feel that way. My first feeling from a movie, thank you Super 8, it's a really good movie. Okay, you were a little kid, 11, 8, 9, 10, 11, sure. 3.5 stars. While pretty unoriginal, it's still fairly decent. I wouldn't say pretty unoriginal, I would say completely cliched in every aspect. Which doesn't mean it was doomed. There are certainly many successful movies that I'll defend that are completely cliched, but this just was cliched plus boring and illogical at the end. The deadly combo in my book. 4.5 stars. Stranger Things before Stranger Things was a thing. Yeah, again, I say Stranger Things makes this look even worse and it makes it age even worse over time. But don't think that this was somehow, the thing that made Stranger Things possible, because it wasn't. A lot of other things were taken into the writing of Stranger Things. In fact, go back to E.T. Go right back to the opening scene of E.T. from 1980, I'm going to say 82, okay, if I'm correct. But E.T. certainly you will find that on the opening scene of Stranger Things. This is just a rip-off imitation of that in a lot of ways. So don't say this is what inspired Stranger Things, because you've got like the horse and the cart turned around. 3.5 stars. Some films are made for pure enjoyment or pure entertainment, and when they are done good, and on top of that in the fashion of the 80s, it's a good treat. Spielbergian touch is strong in this one. Stranger Things would follow. Yeah, again, trying to say that Stranger Things came from this is like a insult to Spielberg, in my opinion. 3 stars. Music and slangs. Super 8 is a plot-driven sci-fi thriller about a bunch of guys accidentally crossing the path of an incident that changes their lives forever. The feature is engaging throughout the course, where it is busy through each perspective and yet never gets congested, keeping the audience tangled in its mythological bubble. It is flat out hilarious, brimmed with tiny notions that easily... Wrong, wrong, and wrong. I don't know what film you're talking about, but yes, you're in 1979, and then after that, everything goes downhill. That's my synopsis of what all these words say. 3.5 stars. It's a sweetly nostalgic, thoughtful film that harkens back to the days of simpler fun making. The child actors deliver performances far exceeding child actor standards. I disagree. It juggles heart, humor, and even moments of sheer terror. I disagree. There's no sheer terror in this. There's no suspense or terror in this at all. It doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. At the end, it's supposed to be a tearjerker, and it doesn't even do that. So let's move on. 4.5 stars. Reminded me of the summer movies I saw as a child, like a new Goonies, etc. Then again, wasn't Spielberg behind that too? Good family film, yet probably a little too scary at times for the very young. If you're 8 years old or even 6, maybe this is too scary for you. But come on now, in 2019, even in 2011, this is not in any way scary. 2.5 stars. I think if you are a young adult, this is a very good movie, but I am not. Young adult meaning like 18 or 19, oh, you would have to be a pretty easily impressed 18 or 9-year-old. Very easily impressed. Give these kids more credit than that. Come on, 18 or 19. I know they're not old enough to drink legally or buy drinks, but they're not all that shallow. Come on, they do have some tastes. 5 stars, best movie of all time. Sure, maybe if you're talking about Close Encounters, maybe you think that's what you saw. 3 stars, Super 8 succeeds in keeping you entertained throughout the movie, but in the latter half of the movie, a heretofore interesting plot and excellent acting goes off the rails and is replaced by spectacular but somewhat boring special effects. Yeah, that's a nice way of saying it. It does go off the rails. 5 stars. I don't know what it is about this movie, but I loved it. It's one of those sci-fi movies that actually has me engaged from beginning to end. The biggest impact I think this movie made is that it's not all gun a-blazing and explosions. It actually takes the time to deal with the loss of certain characters. No, I disagree. You know, a lot of characters are disappeared, abducted by the alien monster to be found later and rescued. What was the point of that? What was the alien doing with them? I don't know. I never quite figured it out. I don't think that the alien had it figured out. Let's move on. 4.5 stars. Years before nostalgia became a thriving business in entertainment, with Stranger Things and Ready Player One, It, to name a few, J.J. Abrams nailed it with Super 8. His homage to kid adventure films of the 1980s does it all right and has its own story to tell as well. I love how they simply set up the characters and their history with a few brief scenes that have a lot of emotion to them and don't feel the need to over-explain things. I don't think that the relationship of the kids was in depth at all. I don't think it had emotion to it. I think it was very superficial. It relied upon references to the late 70s, early 80s. Just to show you that they were there. But I didn't get anything else out of that. It didn't make me feel anything. In fact, like I said, by the end of the movie, I couldn't even tell you what any of the characters' names were. So much for that. 4 stars. Well before Stranger Things, J.J. Abrams had made this nostalgic ode to the Spielbergian films of the 80s. Yes, it's an insultingly made homage to Spielberg, it seems to show that J.J. Abrams only finds Spielberg relevant in the most superficial ways. Again, to me, that's insulting. 3.5 stars. An enjoyable movie, but boy, has Stranger Things plagiarized this film. No, you've got that wrong. Suffers a bit in the shadow of Stranger Things, naughty Duffer Brothers, but has a lot of charm and heart. Gets a little too action-packed for my tastes, but there are worse ways to while away a couple of hours. Action-packed, the alien is stealing microwave ovens and etc. and generators that we don't really see him doing, but we hear about it, at the town hall meeting or whatnot. Yeah, that's so action-packed. I just didn't know what to do with myself. That's so much action. 5 stars, a new favorite, really good. Oh, lucky you. 3 stars, yeah, not English. 4 stars, it reminds me of the 70s or 80s nostalgia inspired by Spielberg's own early works, such as E.T. and Jaws. Yes, it's such an inspiration. No. 3.5 stars, a solid, nostalgic sci-fi film. No. Nostalgically shallow in every way. 4 stars, Super 8 uses a technique made famous by the mother of all alien films, Alien, and that it never to do a full frontal of the alien, not to zoom in on every fang and all the dripping gore. What you don't see, what your own imagination comes up with is way scarier than what J.J. Abrams and crew can conjure up. Who can forget the scene in Alien where you see a crew member and a cat lover at that being murdered in the reflection of his own cat's eye? Yeah, you're saying how fantastic a movie like Alien was. It's done completely crap in this movie. It's a shallow, it's not even worth the cat's reflection in a puddle of blood. That's how ridiculous this is. It shows you how bad J.J. Abrams is. You just made my point. The 1979 film Alien does that. It shows you the owner's, the victim of the alien, his cat, is looking at the reflection of what happens to him in a puddle of blood. That is fantastic. It came across as fantastic. It's ingenious. it's sheer super genius level of filmmaking compared to anything J.J. Abrams has done in this film or many of his others. J.J. Abrams is very superficial, and like I guess his fanboys just lap that up. Wow. 4 stars. A great movie from J.J. Abrams that many people, including me, think it somehow connects to Cloverfield. Wow. Again, fanboys of J.J. Abrams want everything to connect to Cloverfield, even just a random movie script that has nothing to do with Cloverfield. They want it to somehow be made to connect to Cloverfield. What does that have to do with this movie? I don't know. 4.5 stars. Stranger Things, the movie. No, Stranger Things was a successful homage to Spielberg's E.T. This one's a fail. 5 stars. This generation's E.T. I don't know what they mean by this generation. If you mean 8-year-old kids, okay, maybe, but we'll revisit that when they become 28 and we'll see how that holds up. 4.5 stars. Really great sci-fi movie that's new but still has the nostalgic feel similar to E.T. Now this is a review from 2017, so they're saying the movie's new. Well, relative to E.T. it is, but yeah, really great sci-fi movie that's new. Well, it's new in production value, sure. Is it new in material? No. It's like taking nuggets of Spielberg's earlier work, the cliched parts, stitching them together and hoping that it'll get me to like produce a tear at the end. No. 3 stars. A cliched ending brings the score down a bit on this otherwise gripping tale. The preteen romance doesn't help either. The preteen romance is like very shallow and it doesn't do anything for me. The cliched ending, no, it was cliched right from the point that the high school teacher that's also somehow involved in the government conspiracy gets hit by the train in his pickup truck. That's where the cliches began. It was very soon into the film. 3.5 stars. Super 8 draws on nostalgia and pulls you back into your memories from other great summer blockbuster films. Very much like a Spielberg film, you get some good visuals, mystery, thrills, and emotion. Super 8 is not great, but definitely good enough to watch. Well, the last line there kind of like invalidates everything they wrote before. Super 8 is not great, and I agree. 3 stars, not English. 5 stars, oh, I can't wait. Super 8 is a horror thriller that is another one of my favorite films and has some amazing performances from many of the actors displayed in this film. That's awesome. It sounds like, you're working to get on the J.J. Abrams marketing team. You may make the cut. Maybe you did. Congratulations, but I don't believe you. 3.5 stars. If you like Dreamcatcher or The Faculty, then this is for you. Well, I definitely don't like Dreamcatcher, and I'm going to get to that on another episode. The Faculty, for 1998, maybe it was passable. It's also another film that ages very poorly, and I think I've spoken on that one already. 4 stars. It's got the feel of an old 80s movie or series, kind of like Stranger Things. Elle Fanning is cute and the boys are pretty funny. The explosion and everything was a little bit too much. Maybe shorten the length of the train. Kind of bullshit how the guy in the truck didn't die. The movie's plot is pretty interesting. The twist of it all is nice. That message at the end of learning to let go kind of brought a tear to my eye. This movie is kind of the more violent version of E.T. Okay, let's break this down so I can refute every bit of it. It's got the feel of an old 80s movie or series, kind of like Stranger Things. Well, first of all, Stranger Things pulled, yes, directly from E.T. and other material in that genre. This one didn't pull from Stranger Things. Stranger Things didn't pull from it. No, sorry, wrong. The girl's cute and the boys are pretty funny. I disagree. They're like cardboard characters, but if they looked good, okay, that's subjective. I can't agree or disagree. The explosion and everything was a little bit too much and shortened the length of the train, and the guy didn't die in the pickup truck. Yeah, I've mentioned that. It showed off a lot of CGI with the train cars flying end over end. And of course, in true cliche fashion, the kids run along with it so the camera can pan along with it instead of doing what any other human being would do at that site of that train carnage and run completely in the opposite direction, perpendicular to it, to run away from the train tracks. No, they run along with it so the camera can pan along with it and show you all the miraculous CGI and how, the train freight cars flip end over end, and how isn't that awesome? It was a bit much and it was kind of pointless, I agree. The movie's plot is pretty interesting. Only if you've never seen any other sci-fi movie since like 1977. The twist of it all is nice. There is no twist because, again, you're just shown that the alien wants to go home. You've kind of figured this out by the time that you hear about microwave ovens and generators being stolen. That's not really much of a twist. You are confused as to whether this is a monster or a sympathetic alien. I'm still confused. The movie is kind of the more violent version of E.T. Yeah, it's the more violent and pointless version of E.T., the kind that you should skip, and kind of it disrespects E.T. I will agree with you there. Let's do this some more. 5 stars. I loved this movie. Kind of a throwback to the good old days of monster movies. Maybe if you mean like back in the days when they were black and white and the monsters were like made up of like shag carpet glued to some stunt guy, and it would be in their best interest to not show you this very clearly or to put it all in a very dark setting, then yeah, it might be a throwback to that. And in fact, that's one of the things about the CGI alien slash monster in this. Again, it's hidden in the darkness on top of like just happening to be where the camera doesn't happen to be conveniently, because like when you do get a look at it, it just looks like cartoonish CGI. Big surprise there, right? 4.5 stars. This is a fantastic movie. Reminds me of an actual movie from the 80s. Yeah, it superficially looks like it was set in the same time period as one of those movies. That's about it. 3.5 stars. Spielberg and Abrams team up to make a stellar movie with a group of amazing young actors. The film is well directed, creative writing, and overall blast to watch. Again, maybe you got on J.J. Abrams' marketing team after this in 2017. Congratulations. I hope it works out. 3 stars. JJ started crafting the sci-fi genre here. Really? I didn't know that. JJ Abrams he started crafting sci-fi here. Okay, that explains what I've been missing. I guess all the stuff from the last 40 or 50 or 70 years, I guess that was just like another genre that I'm mistaking for sci-fi. Okay. 4.5 stars. Heartwarming and emotional, Super 8 takes themes like family, friendship, young love, government cover-ups, and amateur filmmaking and seamlessly injects them into a monster movie that feels like something from the 80s. Yeah, it feels like it was made in the 80s but with a bigger budget, but it didn't really have a plot or anything that made sense. Yeah, okay. 4 stars. I'm not gonna care. 2.5 stars. I thought this was going to be something much more original than it was. Wasn't bad, but I'd rather watch the Monster Squad. I agree. Monster Squad was original in its day. I haven't seen it since it was a new thing. I could probably watch that today, and I would before I watch this again. So I agree. 4 stars. Super 8 is a surprisingly thoughtful sci-fi flick with a smart script, strong visuals, and fantastic performances from its mostly young cast. Marketing nonsense again. 3 stars. Possibly one of the best horror films ever made. Really, I didn't even realize this was a horror. I thought it was about a confused alien that wants to go home and we should help him. 5 stars. The best homage to Spielberg's films that could ever be made. By J.J. Abrams. I haven't heard Spielberg say that he was insulted by it. In fact, his name is still attached to it, just like it was when it was released. So I'd say, okay, then he approves, but like to me, it would be taken as an insult. 2.5 stars. The characters are difficult to care for, and the story quite slow, but overall the mystery is engaging and interesting. Ultimately, though, it all felt a little childish. Yeah, I would agree completely with this, but there's no mystery that's engaging or interesting. By the time the microwave ovens were stolen and the generators were disappearing, the mystery was gone at that point. Unless you're 8, you don't realize that, somebody might want to construct something out of those electrical parts. Maybe if you're 8, that goes past you the first time. 5 stars. What to say about this movie? It's just amazing. The characters are great, story, great action, humor, and it takes a lot from Steven Spielberg's great other movies, E.T., etc. And it's a great summer movie. Overall, it was awesome, and I loved it. Sure. And you turned 10, and your 10th birthday was awesome. Congratulations. 5 stars. A very well done and original cinematic brilliance from Abrams and Spielberg. I've seen it like 20 to 30 times, and it never gets old. Wow. Somehow I don't believe you. 4 stars. What I liked, J.J. Abrams' Super 8 is pretty much Spielberg on drugs, and I mean that in the best possible way. It's got all the emotion and heart in all the right places, and it's a family drama at its core, but it also offsets any chance of that kind of cheesiness in the most incredible way through sheer insanity. Seriously, it almost seems like a spoof of itself thanks to a completely zany plot and mad visuals aplenty. I sure love how the Steven-esque emotional through lines and storyline, it's almost like they're doing a parody in their review. I'm going to take this as sarcasm, and I get it, but it took me a while to get it. They're basically saying it's crap. Okay. 4.5 stars. What a crackling film. I'd forgotten everything about it apart from knowing there was a train wreck, but it just played out as a great old-fashioned monster feature. Well, I'll stop there. Yeah, if you forgot everything about this in what looks like 5 years, other than that there was a train wreck in it, then I'd say it's a pretty bad film. Don't you think that? I mean, don't you think you should ask yourself why the only thing you remembered was the train wreck at the beginning? Because it was boring, it was derivative, it was pointless. But I'll continue. But it just played out as a great old-fashioned monster feature with a tease of more and more views all the way through. Ah, so like you got further glimpses of the creature eventually at the end. You actually saw the creature's face. Wow, that's incredible. Nobody ever thought of doing that before. Let's continue. Classic Spielberg, although I'd guessed long before the end that it must be a J.J. film from the massive use of lens flare. Highly recommended. Yes, I was going to mention this too, but I didn't want to just bag on JJ for the lens flare. But since somebody else did, I will too. That's his hallmark. To find out if a movie was shot by J.J. Abrams, just look for the lens flares. He actually has people aiming little flashlights into the camera lens from oblique angles to create these lens flares when they wouldn't have ordinarily occurred with proper stage lighting and set design. He puts them in there manually by hand. You can see this in documentaries showing how he does it. It's his hallmark. He thinks it's really cool. Nobody's ever thought of this before. It's his custom touch. It could almost be considered like his Hitchcock cameo. Instead of having a cameo in every movie, or like Hitchcock did, or like M. Night Shyamalan does, thinking he's Hitchcock, JJ simply like has somebody shine a small flashlight into the camera lens so that this is one of his authentic productions. It's a sheer genius work of his. Let's move on. 3 stars. As great as good movies get, but still just a good movie. I don't know what you're saying there. 2 stars. I am very disappointed in this movie. The CGI was pretty good, hence the 2 stars. Other than that, it was basically a hodgepodge of familiar characters, reminisce of days gone by in a typical middle-class life. Throw in an alien from Close Encounters who seemed to run havoc, and they're room for disaster. There was one part where the main character, Joe Lamb, is staring face-to-face with the alien and starts a conversation with it like it was E.T. What an absolutely ridiculous movie. I'll agree. This movie doesn't know if it's going to be E.T. or it's going to be a horror movie or it's going to be a mystery type thing to solve. It doesn't seem to know what the hell it is until the end, and then it's not going to satisfy any of those things. When you talk about a hodgepodge of familiar characters from days gone by in typical middle-class life, yeah, it's a shallow attempt to give you that, like Spielberg did this perfectly in the first scenes, with Richard Dreyfuss and his family in Close Encounters. This movie tries to do that and just fails in the most superficial way possible. Yeah, JJ throws clothes on these characters and puts them in a house that's decorated like the house from the 77 Close Encounters movie. And then, in his way of thinking, that's enough to become Close Encounters. That's a proper homage to Spielberg. I find it insulting. 5 stars. Well acted, entertaining story about kids shooting a movie when disaster strikes. It was until like the train crashed, and then it became a bad, insulting horror alien movie. Anyway, 4 stars, 4 out of 5. A more violent version of E.T. This movie still is a lot of fun and has some really great performances. No, that's marketing. 3.5 stars. It's not English. And I'm going to call this one because I don't want to get myself all worked up too much over this. 75% audience score. This deserves a 55% audience score. It deserves to be rotten. 81% fresh. That's because Spielberg's attached to it. Almost every film that he's in, his name is on the box cover. In any way, all of a sudden it's certified as fresh, no matter what anybody else thinks. Forget about what the critics normally nitpick. They just don't choose to nitpick a Spielberg film in the same way that they'll nitpick everybody else. So I disagree highly, and I will see you again on the next Rotten Reviews.